Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellished Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishedpod@gmail.com. I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishedpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website at www.embellishedpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and even some handwritten articles about different things that are happening in the whiskey space. Today we have Jaz'min joining us from Bardstown Bourbon Company, and I've been waiting for a moment to be able to finally have someone from Bardstown Bourbon Company on the recording. Really enjoy what they have going on. I enjoy their whiskeys and their visitor experience on site, so I hope you guys enjoy the conversation that I have with Jaz'min. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this particular episode. I'm incredibly lucky to have Jaz'min Weaver joining me from Bardstown Bourbon Company, and you've got kind of a really circuitous path to get to where you are today. So if you could just, give the folks that are listening or watching kind of the elevator speech on who you are, how you got to where you are, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Totally. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It is always a privilege and a surprising, like flattering, humbling thing to have people care about what I have to say about whiskey. Secondly, so I was a bartender in Metro Detroit,
Mhm.
running bar programs, most recently known for Frame, which was 5-course tasting menus that changed every 4 days with chefs that visited from around the nation. I did that for 5 years. Um, but my big thing is pairing flavor to fragrance and food to beverage. I helped open the nation's first fragrance bar. I feel like I'm saying a lot. My bad. But all of those things led me to be in front of our master blender and VP of marketing, and they suggested that maybe the next path or the next step on my path would be to become a traveling educator. And that's what I do now. I go around the nation, I spread the good news of Bardstown and just kind of explain what it's like to be part of a distillery that is really looking at bourbon in a different way. We're curious, we're explorers. There's no place we won't go. And we're doing our best to see what that next flavor is, what that
Mhm.
next technique is, and it's been really an exciting journey.
So you mentioned, kind of creating these experiences that we're changing on a regular basis, which seems like an incredible amount of overhead, and it seems really, really interesting. Like, it's a fantastic way to showcase flavors and to, be very boutiquey, I guess you could say, in the way that you're doing a program. Um, when you think about Bardstown Bourbon Company, and they're by no means a small company, but whenever I think about them, right, the growth that I've seen from them in the last 10 years, from where they started to where they are, it's always been about flavor profiles more so than tradition. Is that maybe part of the allure of working for a company like Bardstown as opposed to the myriad of other places that you probably could be working within the spirit space?
Yes, absolutely. So it would have taken an incredibly special distillery to pull me out from behind the bar. I loved bartending. It was the number one love of my life. And to pull me away from every other spirit. I wasn't necessarily whiskey focused when I was bartending. I really, really was interested in everything, and that's why Frame appealed to me because we were always doing something new. I was always getting to meet other people. There was always a brand new style or flavor profile or ingredient that I was being introduced to, and so Bardstown kind of became a natural fit for me in that even before I had ever applied for this role, I knew that any new thing that came from them was gonna have its own flavor profile. It was gonna have a unique story. And now I am in this position where I'm traveling around and yes, I'm educating on some of the same facts over and over again, but in a variety of places with a variety of people and a variety of audiences. And I feel really lucky that it was such a intuitive place for me to go because
Mhm.
there is always a brand new thing to learn in the whiskey space.
Mhm.
And Bardstown kind of makes it easy for me to naturally stumble upon those paths because we're always doing something different.
Mhm.
Like Amrut was the first time American whiskey had ever been finished in Indian single malt casks in the history of whiskey. Like, that's
Mhm.
insane to me. And then more recently, we had our Cathedral finish, which was featured on 60 Minutes. And yeah, okay, people have finished in French oak before, but French oak that was hand selected to repair the Notre Dame after it burnt, like,
Mhm.
that's unique and specific and cool, and so
Right.
I have been able to really apply that same enthusiasm for bartending to this bourbon specifically.
Yeah, and Bardstown. I'm not telling you anything new. This is more for people that are listening or watching. But Bardstown has sort of always been about that. If I think back to collaborations with Pfeiffer Pavitt, or the current Ferrand, or there's like all of these different things. There's Silver Oak. There's breweries that you guys have paired and partnered with to be able to create new and unique flavors. I think the thing that I've always enjoyed about Bardstown Bourbon Company is it kind of keeps tickling the back of my ADHD mind, right? Where it's like, here's a new thing, here's a new thing. You get the different discoveries. If you go back in time, the different fusions, it was a different blend. And, some folks may be like, well, that's just a part of the growing path. But it always felt like that Bardstown was trying to find something a little different, a little unique to put through, and notwithstanding, they did grow and then put out some standard flavor profiles that you'll see with your just the traditional origins line, I think, if I remember correctly. But
Yes.
all that to say, like, how does you mentioned Amrut? How does Bardstown Bourbon Company start to find these partnerships that they want to explore? Is it because you drink a thing, somebody within the company drinks a thing and they're like, we should try this? Or you just like a big Google search, you got an AI engine churning through this, trying to find the next possible partnership? Like, how do you get to one, I guess?
So we are always letting flavor lead the way. And one of the coolest things about the Bardstown collaborations is that a lot of them are organic. It's that somebody meets somebody or gets introduced to someone and says, hey, it would be pretty cool if we did a collab. And every single one of our collabs, it's a handshake deal where nobody's ever exchanging any money. It's just other people who are equally excited as we are to play with flavor.
Mhm.
Uh, the other cool thing that we do with the collaborative series is we finish in a way that others don't traditionally finish. So usually you get a barrel, dump it, rinse it, ship it whenever. We request that, okay, dump the barrel, but leave a little bit of liquid in there. And then we will pump it with our argon gas. So we're pushing out all the oxygen. So nothing is oxidizing. Then we're saran wrapping it to keep the oxygen out, refrigerated storage, and then getting it to us as quickly as possible. So we get access to a lot more of the flavor that was held traditionally in that barrel than I think a lot of people when they're receiving wood that's already dried out.
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of the time, if you look at the collaborative series on a shelf, they tend to have like richer colors. And that's because, like, yeah, there is a little bit of stout in there. There is like the tiniest hint of Cabernet in there still. And that's kind of a cool thing too, that we took something that people have been doing and then looked at it to say, okay, how do we refine this so that we're getting the most out of those flavors?
And you mentioned something there that was kind of new to me, and you've probably said it before, or someone else has said it before. But these barrels that are getting sent to you, you said they're pumping argon into, and the only other place that I've kind of seen that used is in wine preservation, where some folks will use it to help preserve a bottle for a little bit of time between consumption periods, which is a really interesting and novel way to solve the problem. I can't help but imagine that the wine industry played a part in that. But that's a great way to get the real influence out of it, because you have some folks that are leaving a whole lot of liquid in the barrel, and so you're really just getting a blend, and you have some people that are using dry barrels, and you may not get much of an impact whatsoever. And I will say, at least from my experience, I've always noticed the barrel influence at a more appropriate level coming out of Bardstown. But I do want to kind of walk backwards a little bit and talk about, you casually mentioned the Cathedral French Oak. Can you kind of expand that one, because that is a really big story uh, about kind of how you get to the final product, because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with barrel brokers and they kind of let us know if there's anything cool that's coming up. So through that, we were able to learn that once all of this wood had been selected, uh, specifically 300-year-old oak, because they wanted to rebuild Notre Dame with like materials that were similar to what had been there before. Um, they let us know that enough wood was left over to make 6 barrels. And so we were like, yes, of course, we want that. 6 barrels also helped dictate the size of the release. We decided on a 375 instead of a full 750 because that would be more bottles, given that we only had like a set amount of source material to work with. And then our master blender and vice president of new product development, Dan Calloway. So Dan does a lot of like, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it. Nothing that comes out of Bardstown is just like a one and done. Like I dreamed up this crazy recipe last night. We
Mhm.
blended it and it's ready to rock. He is meticulously like tasting, trying, l- resting things for certain amounts of time, and so it was kind of a process to get to that flavor profile, but a really worthwhile one. I think it almost naturally segues into our new Discovery 13 release. So Discovery, always a blend, the youngest thing in the bottle, always at least 6 years old. We're looking for big, robust flavors. But this is the first time that we have done a double barreling. Our
Mhm.
first time using Hungarian oak for a Discovery. And we we have this blend, 4 different Kentucky bourbons, uh, 2 9 years, an 8 year, a 15 year. Um, some of it was put into American oak, and about 40% of it was put into Hungarian oak. And then we blended those two batches back together. And a lot of the time people are like, well, how did you know that 40% was the right number? It's like, well, we tasted it. We tasted when more of it was part of the blend that rested in the Hungarian oak. And Hungarian oak is known for its almost like its spice flavors. So like
Mhm.
big baking spice notes. And they were almost overwhelming. So we found that a more balanced, delicious bourbon needed that American influence too. And and so it's always very interesting when we're going through those blending processes, and then once we get the flavor profile dialed in, then it's okay, what proof does it taste best at?
And that was one of the things I noticed when you were gracious enough to send over a couple of samples, and I looked at the this Discovery, the 13, right, and it says double barreled on it, and I was like, I don't think I remembered that. I'm glad you mentioned that was the first time you did it. And from going backwards, talking about Cathedral, you said it was a 375 milliliter. There's a lot of people like me that are super thankful that those kinds of things exist, because we want to chase down every release, but we also run out of shelf space, like you do.
Totally.
And being able to I don't always want a full bottle. I want enough for me to be able to kind of taste it, but I also want a whole lot of other people to have the same opportunity. And so I think it's a great way to solve a problem, at least amongst the whiskey nerds. It's not always um, the case. Do you think that the 375 milliliter bottle is going to be like a continued process? Is this something that you guys are going to do with more of your releases?
So I know that we are definitely going to continue doing the 375 size for the distillery reserve releases. And those will be this year. They were all barrel finishes. So the Cathedral was the launch of that. Then
Hmm.
we did a Mizunara finish, and then more recently an apple brandy finish. And I'm pretty sure, like quite confident, that there will be 3 more next year. Um, and those will all be 375s as well.
That's awesome, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the other sample that you sent over, the Ferrand. And this is not the first time that you guys have done a Ferrand release. Is this number three or is
So
it
this
two?
is number 2. The first one was a 7 and 11 year bourbon,
Mhm.
rested for 8 months. I think it was 110 proof. This one, a blend, 4 different whiskeys, a 9 year, an 11 year, a 12 year bourbon, and then a 6 year old Bardstown rye, which is
Mhm.
exciting. Like as the Origin series gets older, that means we get to blend with it more. And this was a 15-month finish and 111.8 proof. And even though this is the second time we've worked with Ferrand. Very different flavor profiles on the bottles. I think that a lot more of the cognac comes through in this one. And and I think a great point to make that even if we are partnering with somebody for a second time, the blend that goes in there or the amount of
Mhm.
time that it's finished, that always differs. So we're always looking to make something completely unique than that first time.
You know, it feels that way. I have a small amount of the Ferrand from the first release left over somewhere over here, and once I get past whatever this sickness is that's kind of floating around in me, I'm going to try to put them side by side just to kind of get that comparison. And it's not really a which is better. It's seeing what levers you pull differently, right? Because
Yeah.
some folks want to look at like, oh, this one's better than that one. That's not really the case. At least I think with these kind of releases, this is how this is how the recipe's slightly different, right? When you make a cocktail, sometimes you tweak a certain flavor because you want to make it more pronounced or less pronounced, and that seems like the case at least for most of what you guys do.
Absolutely. I think that I mentioned before that we're curious. Like when I think of Bardstown as a brand, we're explorers, and it's always exciting to maybe take a traditional process or a finish that we've done before or that others have done before and say, all right, how are we bending it to make it our own this time around?
Mhm. You know, and kind of going back and talking maybe a little bit more about you and your cocktail crafting past, right? It feels like and I had this really incredible opportunity. One of my coworkers was digging through a whole bunch of his dad's old newspapers, and we're talking like mid 70s, and he came across this article, and it was about the whiskey space and bourbon specifically dying off and being attacked by vodka and how they were going to deal with it. And uh, in this article, Booker Noah was quoted like, "Oh, you shouldn't mix your bourbon with anything because if you're going to do that, might as well be drinking vodka." And then most of the nation did that for the next 20 years. And there's been a lot of news about bourbon being in a similar position, but I see most brands positioning very differently now, where they're saying, no, like drink it how you want it, but here's some really incredible opportunities to put it in this particular type of cocktail or that particular type of cocktail. And I imagine coming from your background, as you look at each one of these releases, because the flavor profiles are different, you start thinking about different things you could do with them from a cocktail perspective, because that's going to be, just yet another way to enjoy what is already a great foundational spirit. Whenever I did a lot more cooking, they would always say, don't ever cook with the wine that you wouldn't drink with. Well, don't ever make a cocktail with something that you wouldn't drink neat necessarily whenever it comes to a whiskey like this. But as I think about you and what you're doing, how much do you focus on talking about the cocktail aspect of whiskey as you're out in the marketplace?
So, okay, you can take the girl out of the bar, but you can't take the bar out of the girl. In my heart, I am always a bartender, and there is not a single thing that I drink or try or eat without thinking like, man, how would this play in the cocktail space? Uh, Bardstown is like that for me, absolutely. With any whiskey, I recommend the first time you try it neat, and that's
Mhm,
just so you can understand what is the base that I'm working with.
mhm,
Um, but the other thing about cocktails is that or the best thing about whiskey, like, versus maybe, say, a vodka, which to be good should be flavorless and
mhm,
colorless and scentless and all of those things, is picking up on those inherent notes from the whiskey and then finding, like, okay, what plays really well with that? Like, for instance, the Origin series Kentucky straight bourbon. High rye in the mash bill. It's 36% rye, 60% corn, 4% malted barley. That rye spice paired with the sweetness of corn really gives a gingery note to me. So like not a
mhm,
full on pepper, like peppery rye, but like a ginger spice. And because of that, I think that that cocktail works great in mules. And not saying that any of the other Origin series wouldn't be good in a mule, but I think that that one is already geared towards a mule. And our high wheat, um, so 53% corn, 39% wheat, 8% malted barley. To me, it has a lot of citrus notes. And because of that, when I'm mixing with it, I tend to use a lot of lemon or orange juice in a cocktail. Like if there's a classic whiskey cocktail that has lemon in it, then I'm like, oh, high wheat's gonna crush over anything else. And that's the way that, like, my mind works, is but also, like, I love layering flavors, doubling down on flavors, or kind of surprising you with a flavor. We did a Foursquare collaboration, and
Mhm.
I really, really like using that in a Hemingway daiquiri. And everyone's always like, I can't believe that you're mixing with that bottle. Like, one, it'll never exist again. And two, it's kind of expensive. But it's like, well, if I'm only on this planet for 80 ish years and I have the opportunity to have the best version of a Hemingway daiquiri, like,
Mhm.
2 ounces is a tiny price to pay for
Right.
something experiential.
Yeah, we don't have to be as precious about our whiskey as we currently are. You know, at the end of the day, if you have access to the liquid and you have an idea you want to do, why shouldn't you? Like I'm on the same place, you know, same boat that you are, and saying we're not even really guaranteed tomorrow. Let's try that Hemingway daiquiri. You know, it's for the last couple months, I've kind of picked a cocktail every month, and I keep tweaking it all month long until I get to the version of it that makes sense with what I have in my home
Cool.
bar. And so this is it. But when you're kind of putting together an idea where it's going to fit in a cocktail, you know, given your background and whatever you think about the sensory experience and the smell concept versus the flavor concept, do you lean into one or the other whenever you're crafting a cocktail? Do you, you know, use your, you know, what you smell off of it or what you taste off of it or a mix of the two? Because they're not always the same thing, right?
Totally. So I use both frequently. Um, okay, I'm trying to think of the best, like, entry point for this story. So when I started bartending, it was at the time, Metro Detroit's only, uh, tasting menu bar. And from the time I was there until the time I left, I think we started at 9 courses, worked our way up to 15. They changed every week, just a wide variety of ingredients, everything micro seasonal, locally sourced. And it really taught me to honor ingredients, first of all. Uh, and that means accepting them as a whole. So thinking about, like, scent, flavor, acidity, mouthfeel, texture. Uh, but then also, I went to Castalia, which is a fragrance bar, and we were pairing the cocktails to fragrances. And smell, it always, like, your sense of smell is huge to your sense of taste. But I had never really sat down and thought about how smell can totally flip what it is that you're tasting. Like, there were times when you would drink a cocktail, smell the paired fragrance, sip the cocktail again, and find that it's sitting someplace completely different on your palate. And with that awareness, sometimes I am crafting things, smell forward versus flavor forward. And
Mhm.
then there are the ways that you can, like, without, like, a fragrance on a napkin or on the side, but, like, putting bitters on top of your egg white drinks, like, that carries a fragrance on top, or spritzing the outside of the glass, or even when you're expressing the oil from an orange, like, choosing what fragrance hits people first can really bend those flavors as well.
I like that. Spritzing the outside of a glass. I'm getting ready to steal that idea later on as I think about it. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Hemingway daiquiri because it's one of the things I'm going to try to do in the summer as we get
Oh,
closer
nice.
to it. You know, and kind of work my way through that. I don't have any of the Foursquare collab to use for that, so we'll find another path for it. But as you think about, or as I think about, you know, cocktail specifically, and I know this is the thing that sort of stuck on my mind. You know, there's the traditional things that everybody sort of knows to use a bourbon in, or any of Bardstown's products. But you mentioned the Hemingway daiquiri, and that's kind of got my brain jogging because that's traditionally not a whiskey based drink. What what other cocktails would you think about that you would want to kind of bend into the whiskey world that aren't there to begin with?
So I think there are a couple of spirits that almost lend themselves to, like, a bourbon riff.
Mhm.
Anything that's a dark rum,
Mhm.
but also anything that you would put cognac in. Like, a bourbon sidecar is great. I also, like, a way that I like to kind of play with whiskey is finding desserts and then figuring out like, okay, how do I turn this into a cocktail? Like,
Gotcha.
how do I turn this bourbon into a Black Forest cake? How do I turn, like, if I wanted to make a baklava cocktail, what would be the expression that would go best with that?
Mhm.
Um, and that has kind of helped me be creative.
Yep. So that I like that Black Forest drink. Now that's gonna be stuck in my brain for a long time, probably. And if you have a recipe for it on that, you should definitely share it. But you mentioned through the course of all of that, Castalia. Tell me a little bit more about that experience, right? So what that was, and kind of it feels like you built a whole bunch of pieces. And I said this in the introduction that maybe your path was a little circuitous to get to where you are, but um, I feel like these were all really really essential foundational blocks that put you in the position that you're in right now. So let's talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah. So, like many of the roles that I held in Metro Detroit, this was something that um, I was selected for. Like someone met someone else and said like, "Oh, I have a bartender that might be like really great for this role." And so I was introduced to Kevin Peterson, who is one half of the owner founders. His wife Jane is the other half. And it's funny, Kevin calls himself the nose of Castalia, and Jane is the eyes. So she's doing everything visual, and he is doing the scent building. Um, but yeah, he knew that he wanted to open this cocktail bar. He knew that he wanted cocktails to pair to the fragrances. He had never been a bartender before, and someone was like, "You know who does a lot of pairings? Jaz'min Weaver, and you guys should meet." And once I met him, besides being just absolutely incredibly smart, he was incredibly kind and incredibly humble. And so we embarked on this journey to build it out together. And yeah, it's a neat space. Unfortunately, at the end of the month, they will be closing after 7 years, and the perfumery will still exist. They just won't have a brick and mortar cocktail bar anymore. And actually, they were kind enough to invite me back to do like a closing shift, so I'm excited to to go back and close it out. But yeah, it was a really really interesting and unique experience. We made it a point to have seasonal menus, to have um, cocktails and mocktails that paired, and even though we were using the same 8 fragrances, every time, each cocktail that went with it was drastically different from menu to menu. So a really, really kinda neat way to be specific and branch out.
Mhm. You said in there, the both the visual and the smell of it, and I've always kind of heard when it comes to tasting things, you eat or drink with your eyes first, your nose second, and then your mouth is the very last thing to get to enjoy something, and so all of the package is what makes it work. Um, I guess we could walk backwards a little bit from the scent portion of it to the cocktail portion of it, right? So, prior to that, you're talking about being a mixologist or a mixtress as you might have called it. Tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that.
So, okay, when I started, I was at a place called Torino, which was at the time Metro Detroit's only tasting menu
Mhm.
restaurant. When Torino closed, one of our regulars was opening a bar and he was like, "Hey, if you're not working here anymore, it would be great to have you be bar lead." So then I went to a Spanish tapas place and it so I got to learn a ton about Spanish wine. We were really deep diving on mezcal, sherries, Madeiras, and so I got to have a more focused training in that direction. When I left there, I ended up going to a place that was an oyster bar. So 24 hours tied to table, super fresh seafood. And because of that, really did a deep dive on different types of oysters, how to pair spirits and cocktails to oysters, um, how to make sessionable drinks, something that was like lighter that you were going to be eating
Mhm.
with seafood that wasn't going to like drown all those delicate flavors. Then for a while, I worked as a private bartender. So wealthy family had a private chef, and then I would come in and make them punches and homemade tonics or whatever for them to drink, and if they were entertaining, I would bartend for them. And then for a while, I worked at a place that they were kinda known for their whiskey selection, so I got to go on a bunch of single barrel picks, and that was a really rewarding experience. But my main path before I got to Frame, where we were changing that menu all the time, was I was always hunting for the next spot that was gonna kinda nourish the curiosity in me. I think of myself as an eternal student, and so I was purposefully choosing restaurants not because I wanted to make a couple bucks, but because, like, okay, yes, I wanna make money to live, but I also wanna leave here with a skill, and that was always really, really rewarding.
So you said, each pivot, and pivot may not be the right word there, but each progression, each growth progression from one thing to the next was intentional with kind of the interest of gaining more skill sets. Was there an overarching goal, or was it just, here's this creative path and I'm going to explore it until it gets to wherever it goes, I guess?
I just knew that I loved bartending, and when I say that I love bartending, I mean I love every part of tending the bar. I
Mhm.
like having regulars, I like taking care of others, I like having a team that I can impart knowledge onto. Um, Frankly, I even like a good deep clean, so
Mhm.
I was like, "Okay, I know that this is the realm that I'm in, it's the realm I'm gonna stay in," and actually a lot of my opportunities were very organic. They came up like, when I ended up going to the seafood restaurant, it was because someone that I had worked for previously said, "Hey, I know that this is opening, I know that they don't have a bar team yet, I think that you would be a really natural fit for it," and same thing happened when it came to Frame. Someone that I had worked with previously was like, "Hey, this position just opened up. I told them that they should reach out to you. So if you hear from them, it's because I threw your name in the hat." And and then at Bardstown, or then for Bardstown, I was doing a dinner. It was a Bardstown themed whiskey dinner. So a neat pour paired with a cocktail, and then the cocktail paired with the food. And two people who worked from the distillery came and at the end of it were like, "You should consider doing this other thing." Uh, which is why, sorry, I feel like I'm monologuing here, but, a lot of the time people are like, "Okay, what's a 5-year plan look like for you? What do you wanna do next?" And the answer is, I don't know. I just wanna get better and better at this part of things because that next thing, it's gonna come to me.
Mhm.
It's gonna sound, like, very hippy-dippy, but everything that belongs to me is already mine. I'm just waiting to find it. And and anytime I've ever been like really, really actively like hunting, searching, trying to find something, the more it eludes me.
Mhm.
And anytime the plan that I could have had for myself 5 years ago would never have been as exciting or as grand as what I'm doing right now. So I try not to get stuck into what I think I should be doing because something that I never even considered is absolutely going to reveal itself.
Yeah, I understand that completely. I've had a number of conversations with managers before. It's like, "Well, what's your 5-year plan?" I don't know. I'm trying to understand and be as good at the thing that I'm doing right now as I possibly can be, and then we'll figure out the next thing. What I've found, I'm a little older than you, so I can wax poetic here. The more, the harder I search for a thing, the more likely I am to try to force it. And if you're going to try to force it, then it rarely fits very, very well. And so, you either have to break something to force it to fit, or you have to find something that's not quite right. And just kind of
Totally.
working your way towards the right thing usually does kind of pan out, right? Um, you've described a whole lot of stuff here, and you even said, I'm doing a little bit of a monologue, which I greatly appreciate. That's the content we're all here for, right? There's some folks that are like, I want to give you a question, I want a 90-second answer so I can cut it into a reel to then put a, nah, let's get the long stuff. That's what we're after. Because I like people that have a way with words, and you seem to. Now you have a background in English, right, and in writing.
Yeah.
Um, do you think? I know the answer to this, I think, but do you think that you kind of layered a foundation of good storytelling that then kind of leans into pretty much everything you're doing? If you're working in the industry the way you do, you're regularly telling a story, whether it be through a cocktail or having a conversation with people, whether describing a scent or whatever, you have to have that. But do you think you've developed maybe some of these storytelling muscles in a different way as you've leaned into your ambassador role?
Absolutely. So I went to school for English. I thought I was going to become a novelist, and still not too late. I'm still doing
Mhm.
some writing, but at the point when I graduated, I knew that I wasn't going to be a teacher. I didn't have any interest in that. And my family was kind of like, What are you expecting to do with this English degree?" But it has really served me well. I think that I'm a pretty clear communicator. I think that it has assisted me in figuring out the new ways to describe whiskey or flavor and make it a little more approachable. I think that a lot of the time people lack the vocabulary of taste and flavor and texture. So trying to help them think about new ways to approach that has been a source of joy for me. And then, yeah, like developing these storytelling methods and muscles. When I was at Frame, part of my contract was that I had to teach one class a month, and it was usually a cocktail class. And it was such a pain point for me. Like, I would struggle to sleep the night before, and afterwards I would always tell the owners, like, well, I've done this thing that you want me to do. Like, I hate the public speaking. It's excruciating. So hard for me to imagine that now I have a job where I'm on podcasts and I'm doing public
Mhm.
speaking. But it has I have been able to lean on that English background a little bit to be like, okay, like you know what you're trying to communicate. You just got to get it out there.
You know, yes, people often have a hard time with language when it comes to describing what they're tasting or what they're experiencing. And the one that I always bump up against that whiskey nerds really take objection to is the word smooth, and they don't like when somebody describes a whiskey as smooth. And usually, my response to that is that maybe they're trying to describe that it has a velvety texture, and velvet feels smooth. There's a
Yeah.
number of different ways they just don't know yet. In the same way that I have two daughters. They didn't know what a whole lot of words meant for the first 5 years of their lives, and they've got to expand their vocabulary as we help them expand it. And I I don't have quite the position that you do, right? This is exactly what you're doing. You're helping kind of grow people's knowledge of what's going on. But I guess as a person, enters into the whiskey world, they want to start learning these things. What is what's the best way to pick up this vocabulary? Is it bars? Is it appropriate bar? Like, how do I get that if I don't have it?
So the first thing that I always recommend to people is throw out what you think has to be used for tasting.
Sure.
Um, you can also use feelings. Is it sharp? Or like you could also use colors like, oh, this has a red fruit taste, or this is bright, it's sunny, it's warm. Um so often I feel like people think of tasting and they're like, well, I have to name a specific note. And it's like, no, you don't have to be as specific as all that. Like you just
Mhm.
have to get what you're experiencing in your mouth out there. And I had a really interesting time in Atlanta, Georgia, I think a year and a half ago, where we partnered with a candle maker and we smelled through a bunch of fragrances and had people build candles. And then we did a whiskey tasting. And the candle maker was like, yeah, describe like what you're smelling as a color, as a feeling,
Mhm.
as a texture. And people were really surprised by that to be like for me, rye smells green
Mhm.
frequently. And then that helps people connect. Like, okay, is it green like dill? Is it green like spearmint? Is it green like fresh cut grass?
Mhm.
Um, the other way that I recommend people approach sensory or becoming stronger tasters is to taste with others. It's always very useful to hear someone else's perspective or description. Um, at Camp Runamuck last year, so bunch of campers came to the distillery. We were doing a sensory experience. We were tasting through the weeded whiskeys, and someone was like, "Oh, this really reminds me of corn pops." It's like, that's a whiskey I've had 1,000 times.
Mhm.
Yes, it absolutely does have a note of corn pops, and my mind didn't take it there, but once they said that, I'm like, this is an incredible tasting note. Like,
Mhm.
so I guess that's another thing. I also sometimes think about whiskey is cereal. Like, there's obviously grain going on there, and being able to say like, "Oh, like, this kinda reminds me of, like, an Apple Jack." Cool, so you're getting fruit and baking spice off of that.
Mhm. Yeah, it's people do get kind of really axle wrapped on certain flavors, and for me, I get a regular, purple tasting note, and it's just purple. It doesn't mean anything, it's just what it means to me, right? And it's
Right.
not quite synesthesia or anything like that, but it's just, "This is purple," and I tell somebody else, "I think this tastes purple," and they're like, "Yeah, it tastes purple to me too." It's not that it's grape, it's not that it's some other, plummy type flavor, it's just purple. Purple
Right.
is it, and that's okay, and there's not a wrong tasting note, like, your palate is your palate. My palate is my palate, and we're gonna taste things very, very differently. Just like, some folks like, licorice as a flavor. I don't like licorice as a flavor, so if I taste that, I'm probably gonna dislike whatever it is that this is, and somebody else is gonna be like, "This is delicious," and we can disagree, and that's okay. You mentioned Camp Runamuck there, and I'm loosely aware of what Camp Runamuck is, but it kind of jogged my mind a little bit. And you were a part of, when I think about like industry specific type things, right? Things that people participate in that are in the service industry, like you are. You were a part of the Lee Initiative, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So, it was an incredible honor, to be selected. I was one of 2 bartenders, from across the nation. The other one was Rhea Buck, and she is bar lead at Supper Land in shucks, it's either North Carolina or South Carolina, but
Mhm,
one of those Carolinas. Um, but yeah, the Lee Initiative is an incredible set of programming. It stands for Let's Empower Employment. Um, Chef Edward Lee is and his team are setting up women in the industry, and sometimes specifically minority women, to get the same level of training that we are offering to male bartenders, male chefs. When he won his James Beard Award, he realized that even though he was a man, he was still a minority in the makeup of the people who were receiving these awards, and
mhm,
thought like, okay, how do we change this? And the Lee Initiative was an incredibly enriching experience. So I got to do an externship at Billy Sunday, and I got to go to Fab, which is an incredible women's conference, and they paid for me to become an executive bourbon steward.
mhm,
Uh, they put me through my first ever, like, PR training and social media, like, um shucks, I don't have the word for it, but they really thought about every aspect of, like, let's say that you are going to garner attention for your
mhm,
skill and talent, what kind of skills do you need? And yeah, it was a year of a lot of fun and a lot of learning, and then in the end, we ended up going to Succotash Prime in DC and doing, like, a final dinner, and tickets from that dinner were able to raise money for the next year of
mhm,
Lee Initiative mentees. But the main thing that I took away from that, like, yes, I learned a ton, but the main thing was just the camaraderie between, not just the girls in my class, but also the women who had been through the program
mhm,
before. There are so many people that I met because of that program, and even the ones that I haven't met. We followed each other on Instagram, and then if I'm traveling and I'm in their areas, they're like, "Hey, please stop by. Like, we can meet for the first time."
mhm,
It was just an incredible network of support, and that is like, the Lily Initiative has a ton of value in a lot of different directions, but I think the main value for me was, like, building this support system of people who were just as talented and just as
mhm.
driven and excited to brainstorm and do pop-ups and help and answer questions, and I don't have enough positive to say about it. Like, it was a really, really fun experience.
Yeah, it sounds like they've built a great alumni association, so you can kind of have those things. And one other thing, maybe a little bit of an accolade for Jaz'min specifically. You were recently a finalist for a Stave Award, and regardless of the outcome, that feels like an honor, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? What that might mean for you, and how you kind of view yourself in the space?
So in general, I am really, really humbled and delighted to be in this space. Bardstown is a company that is gunning to become a household name in
Mhm.
bourbon, and they could have chosen anyone. In fact, I am sure that over 100 people applied for this role. And to be selected as a half black woman to be in a whiskey space, something that in the past has been traditionally male,
Mhm.
is exciting. I am thrilled to be given a platform because I do think that representation is important and that being the woman in the room or the biracial person in the room, it makes it so that more people feel comfortable taking their seat at the table.
Mhm.
Chances are the chair was already there and they just needed somebody to pull it out for them. So yeah, I feel like incredibly lucky every day. I feel like I'm about to get choked up about it, but I feel incredibly lucky every day. This is very sincerely a dream job. Like I get to represent whiskeys that I deeply believe in, and we get to do new and incredible things. And I get to travel while doing it, and I get to teach others, and I get to learn. Uh, I could not have imagined a better way to be spending my time. Um, so yeah, I'm thrilled in general.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I want to touch on specifically, and you mentioned the seat may have been there. You just needed to kind of show them who should sit there. Uh, Something that I noted at the 2024 Kentucky Bourbon Festival, I noticed that there was an increase in the diversity of the population of people wanting to attend. It wasn't necessarily reflected in the marketing materials for it in 24, but it was more apparent that we're starting to see whiskey is a bunch of me looking dudes. That just is what it is. Like when you go out into the marketplace, they all sort of look like me. We're all going to be, middle aged, somewhat balding, probably have a beard. And you're going to have a lot of opinions that may or may not matter. But there is a diversity of population that's starting to happen that is fantastic, right? Because more palates creates for more unique opportunities for us to all taste something different. Because if it stays homogenous, then it's going to get real boring real damn fast. And so
Absolutely.
I love to see people like you in the space, people like Karen from Green River in the space. You start seeing this kind of, let's get away from the stereotypical shape of what a whiskey person looks like, because that's not what reality reflects. And I like that Bardstown Bourbon Company is a part of that. You mentioned that they're trying to push in towards becoming a household name, and I think being featured on a 60-minute segment is pretty damn close. I don't know if you can get
Oh
much
yeah.
closer than that. But
That was, an incredible moment for us, like,
mhm.
really, really cool to meet Bill Whitaker, really awesome to get to show off our distillery, not just for him and his team, but also to, like, a different subset of the nation, people who maybe aren't traveling the Bourbon Trail, who didn't know that we are a jewel on the Kentucky
Yeah.
Bourbon Trail, frankly, like, we have been really thoughtful and purposeful about making the way that we look and the way that we feel, almost be like a Napa Valley stop. And yeah, 60 Minutes was a crazy time. Like earlier in the year, I had told our master blender, I was like, I'm gonna catch up to you in followers this year. Like I'm gunning for you. And then he was on 60 Minutes and he just took off. I was like, oh no, I'll never catch up now.
Right, right. And you mentioned the Napa Valley view. It's 100% that. So I live in the far western end of Kentucky, and I come to Lexington or Louisville a couple of times a year, and have done so for the last 15 years. And watching the footprint and the style of Bardstown Bourbon Company grow, because it's right there. I'm driving right past it on my way to Lexington every single
Yeah.
time, and kind of seeing that growth and the intentional growth and the intentional design of it all, because a lot of the heritage distillers, they had to sort of figure out after the fact, because they were industrial facilities that then became tourist destinations, and they're like, we how do you spit shine what is an industrial alcohol production facility? It's really, really tough, but building with intentionality allows for you to have that atmosphere. And the kitchen that is there is one of the best in the state, regardless of whether you're at a restaurant or not. I've had a lot of fantastic cocktails and desserts. There was a dessert that you guys had a couple years ago that it still haunts me. I think about it on a regular basis. But what is happening at Bardstown Bourbon Company, I think proves that while we may see a retraction within the overall bourbon space in the United States, um, on-premise experiences and intentional releases will continue to grow, right? You may not see the astronomical growth of 20, 21, 22. Of course, we shouldn't ever see anything like that again, hopefully, because that was a weird time that we all had to
Right.
live through. But you mentioned one thing, and we're running up on time, but I want to follow back up on this. You said, you might want to be a novelist someday, and you are still writing. Without telling me what you're writing, what type of writing are we talking? Fiction, nonfiction? Are we, in a certain genre? Like, what is
Um,
Jaz'min writing?
so if you were ever to go into a bookstore and see that there was a brand new bestseller by author Jaz'min Weaver, it would probably be a murder mystery.
Murder.
I'm a sucker for noir. But if you were to find a compilation of some like fantasy short stories, that too, and then probably eventually a cocktail book.
Mhm.
I have no doubt that I have some opinions and perspectives on hospitality that who knows if anybody will care to read a whole book about them, but that eventually they're going to get out of my head and onto the page for sure.
Well, I'll suggest if you write a murder mystery, at least tell us what cocktail we need to drink with each chapter, like what fits the
Oh,
vibe of that particular chapter, so that way we can kind of experience it the right way. Because I had a philosophy professor in college. He said depending upon who he was reading would dictate what he was going to drink alongside of it, because certain things had a certain vibe for him, and that's sort of stuck with me since then. So, and you have the background. Tell us what to drink whenever we
I
go to read
love
what you
that.
have.
No, that's a great idea. I actually had a really unique experience earlier this year. I was on a podcast called Whiskey Morgue, and he
Mhm.
pairs horror movies with whiskey. And so we were able to kind of talk through some of the bottles and what werewolf movies I would pair with them. And I was like, man, I spend all this time thinking about flavor and fragrance and food
Mhm.
and never really thought like, oh my gosh, what whiskey am I pairing with like atmosphere and feeling? And so that has really had my gears turning ever since then.
Mhm.
Um, I've been
Well,
thinking about like experiential things that maybe we could be doing.
yeah. Well, I mean, and you guys do have a high degree of experiential in a lot of things. You had the was it the House of Bourbon that was the moving thing there a couple of years ago. So there's
Did you cross to
I,
Bardstown? Yeah.
yeah, I've not ever noticed Bardstown Bourbon Company not be intentional about its spaces that it's in, whether it be at festivals or be at events that you guys have created. There's a lot of intentionality, and that's perfect. Like those are the things that the whiskey nerds want. Like I said, we're right at the edge of time. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had talked about?
Just a few short things.
Mhm.
One, if you've never been to the distillery, please check us out. I think that it is a gorgeous facility. We have an incredible visitors experience staff, and chances are you would see our master distiller, Steve Nally, walking around ready to sign a bottle, ready to chat with you. If you can't make it all the way out to Bardstown, then stop at our downtown tasting room in Louisville. It's right on Whiskey Row. A few doors down from us, the Green River Tasting Room, which is our sister distillery, just opened up, and that was an incredible labor of love, like watching that get designed. And finally, follow Danny Bardstown on Instagram. Uh, but then help me keep my promise to gain more followers than him and follow me too. So
Mhm.
jazz.distilled. Easy.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You absolutely should visit the campus. The downtown Louisville experience is fantastic, and it's a great chance to be able to touch in a bunch of places. But I know I've been probably 6 or 7 times to the campus in Bardstown. And if you really, really get lucky, you might sit down at a table to eat dinner and listen to um, Dan Calloway and the guys from Bourbon Pursuit talk about a release that they're building together, and you get to kind of get some early release information. I got that experience one time, but also just some fantastic food, some fantastic cocktails. It doesn't matter if you're a whiskey person or not; you'll enjoy the site regardless, right? You may not be a whiskey nerd, but they're going to have a cocktail you like, they're going to have a dessert you like, they're going to have an entree you like, and they're going to have a hell of a customer experience whenever you're kind of walking around there. So, um, Jaz'min, thank you for your time. I know you're super duper busy flying all over the nation, visiting folks. I think we got to maybe 5 of the 16 questions that I had. So we'll have to do this again sometime. I thank you for your time.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on and leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod to give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and even some more articles about different things that are going on in the whiskey space. Thanks for stopping by.